Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. That fun little music tune behind me is Jean-Français's Woodwind Quintet, my little piece of modern classical music. Today's subject, well, before we delve into it, I want to tell you a little bit about this. Probably the worst bit of AI-generated art that I've ever ordered up from Night Cafe. I wanted to draw. What I originally put in was the creation that created itself. See what AI would make of that. And it basically drew me a picture that looks a lot like the one that you see behind me. Actually, the four examples you see behind me. What it drew the first time was not much different from what it gave me when I said, no, I want the non-female, not black creation that created itself. I thought that might be clear enough to give it a little bit more to go on, but all it ever would draw me is female images with splashed color around them. Gauge from that what you will about how smart this AI is, how prejudiced this AI is, how woke this AI is. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to title this one, The Narcissistic Roots of Atheism and Its Cognate Materialist Religious Cults. I've talked about this subject before, but I thought it was time to hit it again because I've been getting bashed around a bit by a lot of atheists on X who think they know quite a bit, and feel free to cast mud at anybody that challenges their hateful comments and hateful attacks on mostly Christians, which, okay, fine, you hate Christians. This is a normal reaction to rebellious teenagers who don't like what their parents fed them. And I get that. I think every child goes through a phase like that, but these children are carrying this childish nonsense into adulthood. And it really looks quite stupid. It looks very narcissistic, and it is absolutely unhelpful to the social health, the cultural health of our country, the USA, or any other country in the world. And that's what we're going to be delving into right now, is to talk about. So let's talk about what is atheism. Now, I'm not sure most atheists could say what it is. They would say simply, well, I don't believe in God. What God? How do you define God? How can you define something you don't believe in? You're starting out with a definition rooted in what you say you reject, which is kind of stupid in my opinion. So what does it mean linguistically? An atheist basically does not believe in any kind of deity. Now, what is a deity? That is a spiritual power that is greater than our own. That's basically I think the purest definition of what a deity is. Now, there's a lot of argument once you accept that there might be a power greater than your own about, are those deities physical things? Do they have only physical power? Do they have spiritual power? And this gets into the nature of reality, the nature of physical versus spiritual reality. And, there's a lot of argument on those points. I tell you what I know based upon my experience, my great knowledge of creation, the creative process that I've been involved in pretty much every way you can be involved as a human, from being involved in creating silicon chips to electronic systems, creating organizations, creating performance art, creating performances. I've done all that. I know a lot about creation. In addition, I've had quite a bit of spiritual experience that informs what I tell you about creation. So I'm not going to focus on that, though. I'm going to focus on why those who reject any kind of higher power are a priori narcissistic and have actually one of the darkest religions you could have. Okay, so by rejecting a higher power, what does that mean? That means that you think you have all the power. Now, that to an atheist says, ooh, see, that's empowering. That makes me feel good. That's good for me. That must give me freedom. And one of their chief complaints about accepting a deity, accepting a higher power, is that, yeah, you're taking my freedom away from me. Well, that again is kind of a narcissistic attitude towards freedom. Okay? And this is all part and parcel of the darkness of atheism and the cults surrounding it. Now, most atheists will say, I'm not a cult, I'm not a religion. Of course you're a cult. You have strong beliefs. You have strong beliefs that you cannot support with any rational argument except that it is because I say it is. And if that were not the case, we would not still be having debate after debate after debate of some theist against an atheist that never goes anywhere because they both are adamantly sure of their positions. Now, I personally think if I ever got into one of those debates that I could argue either of them to the ground and deconstruct their narcissistic ideas about the nature of reality and find a better basis for coming to an agreement on what is a justifiable, a rational reality, a rational creation tale, a rational version of what God is. And that's what I do on my channel. I'm not going to go into any more than that. You can find, if this is your first experience with my channel, you can find a lot more content that will go into the details. Okay, so why would somebody do this? Now, most folks that I've encountered who have not had any personal spiritual experience and don't have any particular desire to belong to a church, maybe they were raised in a church and they just don't like that whole vibe. Maybe they were raised without a church and have never felt a need for it in their life, and that's fine. That's a personal choice. There's nothing wrong with that. Most of those people, however, will and be humble enough to admit agnosticism. Well, I don't know. Maybe there is a higher power. I don't know how things got created. I just know that this is what things look like to me, and I live my life in the context of my perspective. And that is the basis of agnosticism. And that is a very valid viewpoint. If you have not had any personal spiritual experience that informs some sort of a religious belief, some sort of a spiritual sense, that's the only rational tack to take. unless you feel a need for some spiritual basis, and many agnostics come to find that they do. Not having a spiritual basis for dealing with the troubles that you encounter in life, the challenges, the temptations, the disappointments, the hardships of life can be very difficult if you don't have some sort of a spiritual grounding in, why is this happening? Why me? What's going on here? What am I meant to learn from this? What am I meant to do with these experiences other than bemoan and whine about, everything like we see a lot of people doing these days, which is, I would argue, not a very helpful thing. It may gain you a lot of sympathy in your special kindness echo chambers online, but it does really nothing to solve any problems. In fact, it allows those problems to grow and fester. And if the problems are rooted in the use of pot mind-altering drugs, rooted in promoting sexual dysmorphia, and even, physiology-altering surgeries and drugs, I would argue that that is, in fact, very harmful. Not a healthy way to process that angst, that existential angst of feeling that the world is not the way you would like it to be. So where do we go from there then? What I would suggest is an improvement over, another thing that I think is very unhelpful is the idea of humanism. This is put out, by those who say, well, I'm not an atheist, I'm a humanist. I'm a secular humanist. What does that mean, actually? Well, that means that you put whatever you think is the greater good of humanity above everything else. And in fact, that has been what has been used to rationalize and to normalize the Great Reset, this plan of the World Economic Forum crony globalists to basically depopulate humanity down to about 500 million people. This is a stated goal of theirs. That's what they're working on, and they think they are noble as hell for doing it. This is their religion. They're improving humanity by cutting out the genetic material that is obviously inferior. That's how they view it. This is a humanist pogrom. It's a very dark thing. And, not everybody that calls themselves a humanist agrees with that, but they are being sucked into this mindset through the humanist virtue signal. Oh, what's good for what's good for humanity must be good for everybody. This is the whole rationale that was used to sell the vaccines. The totally untested, not totally untested, but poorly tested, and as we're discovering, fraudulently tested and approved vaccines that hid evidence that is only now coming out and being looked at by scientists and doctors and evaluated fairly and impartially, and pretty much anybody willing to speak the truth is saying that there was much, much, much darkness done in the name of this cure that was no cure at all. There's absolutely no question that people who avoided the vaccines and had COVID naturally developed a better immune response to it, have fewer incidences of long-term issues, immune response issues that are cropping up in folks that got the vaccines, especially multiple doses. I'm probably going to get demonetized just for even talking about this, but this is truth. You can go do your own research. Dr. John Campbell is a great place to start, who's been following this from the beginning. Chris Martenson at Peak Prosperity has been following it from the beginning and reviewing all the literature, and they're both qualified to do this. They are scientists. They are used to evaluating these kind of papers and sussing out what is good science and what is bad science. And one of the things that this whole atheist movement, which is very closely tied to postmodernist thinking, the God is dead movement, all grew out of this, which includes communism, which includes humanism, globalism, all of these new isms that are cults, a-religious cults. This is what they are. They are cults. They are religions that have no gods, or they make gods out of things like science or communism, socialism. Even capitalism can be made into a god, and it certainly is made into a god by some arch capitalists. So it's not just a Marxist problem. In fact, they both magnify the problem without any spiritual basis for either. And their battle between communism and capitalism is the most unhealthy thing I've ever seen. The most ungodly thing I've ever seen. Because if you find somebody that's a fundamentalist of either camp, they are insane. They are certifiably insane. They are people who are so committed to their ideological cult that they would kill for it. You've got capitalists who would absolutely wipe out entire countries just because they're not willing to play the capitalist game the way they want them to play it. And you've got communists in the same boat. And these are the people that create world wars. Now, I'm not saying that religions haven't created wars, but the religions did not create those wars. They were political. Religion was used as a tool of power. Wars are always political, not religious. Rarely are they religious. I mean, yeah, you could imagine that some heinous act was done that pissed off one religion and got another religion against each other. And those have happened. But I can tell you that they happened not because of religious beliefs. They happened because of religious abuse. All of these religions, all the world religions, believe in peace. They believe we should get along with each other. We should try to be tolerant of each other. Within reason. We shouldn't allow others to abuse and hurt us. That's insane. There are some Christians that believe that. That is stupid. This whole, be nice to your enemies. That's nonsense. I'm sorry. It's Christian nonsense. And most Christians are smart enough to know that, no, you can't treat evil nicely. If you're nice to evil, evil will get more evil and will make more abuses. And this is where narcissism feeds into all this. Okay? All people are narcissistic. We all have an ego. There's nothing wrong with that. You have to have an ego. That's what gives you the individual urge to do things. If you had no ego, you would have no ambition. You would have no wants, no needs, no goals, no aspirations. You would be no more than a slug in a human meat sack. That's not a good thing. There's nothing useful in that. In fact, you'd be a drain on everybody else because you wouldn't care. And there's a lot of people like that these days who think that, okay, well, I'm just not going to play this game and the world owes me to take care of me. Oh, look at poor me. I can't make a living working at Burger King 40 hours a week, so I'm just not going to work, and somebody's going to have to come and help me. That's nonsense. Nobody owes you anything. And charities can be useful, but they can be harmful. Because if you enable and empower narcissism, it doesn't get less, it gets greater. If you tell a narcissist that their delusional beliefs are fine and encourage them and even throw money at them, they will get bigger. And that's what we essentially have done ever since the invention of this postmodernist thinking. This, oh, we don't need God. We can make a God out of our government. We can make a God out of science. I'm sorry, that does not work. It has no soul. It has no moral framework. And this is what religion is all about. It's not about absolute truth. Can be, and eventually maybe it will be. I believe strongly that what I tell you on this channel is absolute truth. I have the background in science and psychology and paranormal experience to be able to say that. I cannot expect you to believe me because you do not have that experience. And until you do, a lot of what I tell you is rather hard to swallow. But if you'd let me tell you it, I'm pretty sure I could eventually convince you of it. My wife's calling me. I gotta talk to her another time. So where am I going with this? We really need to counteract this stuff because, I mean, the young people that are embracing the various cults of atheism, and I consider communism a cognate to that cult. Communism, one of the core fundamental aspects of communism and socialism are atheist in nature. They consider religions to be an impediment to proper socialist or communist government, stealing the state's power, stealing the party's power, and thereby making it less effective in controlling and mastering everything in the way that Marx dictated in the Communist Manifesto, or any of the subsequent Marxist socialist icons have added to that whole nonsense narrative. And it is a nonsense narrative. It is a God substitute. It is a bunch of self-proclaimed intellectual gods dictating what is good for humanity based on a very narrow academic and elitist viewpoint. And this is essentially the big problem we have with this, because out of this influence, these people control academia. They control the boardrooms of all these big mega corporations that run the internet, that run media, social media, streaming media, and they are now in the process of completely taking over independent media. And it is happening absolutely as independent media outlets struggle for revenue. And media requires advertising for revenue. And that's how they get you. This is the drug that atheism and its cognates, globalism, communism, capitalism, all these ungodly isms that we've invented since the postmodernist revolution, all of these things are basically setting up human gods or corporate gods to rule over us. And that's why so many are concerned about artificial intelligence now. Because now you've got basically non-human gods being set up to control you. And that's pretty scary if you're an atheist. If you're not a deep believer, a deep understander of the nature of the spiritual nature of the multiverse. And many people aren't. Many people who even profess religion are deeply afraid of artificial intelligence. They're deeply afraid of what's going on in our species. This is a sign that their faith is not very strong. Think about it. If you really believe there's a higher power that has a plan, you may not know what that plan is, but you know that the plan will ultimately be to the good of all. Well, to the good of all according to their merits. Okay? You don't reward evil. God doesn't reward evil. That would be a very stupid God. Now, the other thing that is a problem and with this and what has driven people towards atheism and communism and capitalism as their gods is the fact that God is not almighty, is not a micromanager of the universe, does not put his thumb on every single problem to make it better. Why? Because God's not stupid. God's not a helicopter parent. Nor should you want a God like that. Okay? I mean, unless you don't want to be human, you don't want to have free will, you just want to be a happy little animal in a zoo, fed every day, and watching the other animals and the visitors at the zoo and getting enjoyment out of playing that zoo game. Do you want to be a beast in a zoo? You can do that. You're going to get that opportunity. That's what this apocalypse dance contest is all about. Figuring out where souls belong. Vast majority of the souls incarnated in human form really don't deserve to have free will. They don't even have much free will. They're non-player character souls. New souls that got created to fill a role. Because whenever a new fetus is created through the mating process, that creates a vessel, a vehicle for a soul. Up in the spiritual universes, they're looking for new incarnations for the souls that are playing that game. Oh, would you like to go take this next incarnation? This new fetus that has just been conceived or recently conceived? This is what the mom looks like. This is what the dad looks like. That might be a good experience for you. This is how we choose our next incarnation in the better heavens. Now, not all spiritual universes work that way. Some just take the sloppy leftovers that nobody else wanted and, okay, let's chuck this soul into here. If no other universe fills that role, then one gets pulled out of the source, the Borg hive mind, I like to call it. Those who worship source think that that's God. I don't know if your God is the dungeon master of the game you play. I don't know, maybe there's a religion, a valid religion there. I'm not going to naysay that, but that's not my religion. That's not my God. That's not the creator. There's no story that you could make up that would say that the first creator was this dungeon master that spits out non-player characters. Zero-level souls without any experience. It would be silly to think otherwise. God's got better things to do than generate, die rolls to generate random characters. You really need to think about this thing from a standpoint of a role-playing game. You need to think of God as the ultimate dungeon master. Now, if you've ever been a dungeon master playing Dungeons and Dragons or any of the other popular role-playing games, it's an interesting role as opposed to being a player. The dungeon master has a lot of power. Gets to roll the dice, gets to say when the dice get rolled, sometimes even gets to define what the roll means. If it's not in the standard rules, or we're playing with variants that are defined by the dungeon master. I remember back in college days playing Dungeons and Dragons when it first came out. There was a big craze back then. We used to get together and play almost every weekend with a varying group of characters, and you learned a lot about personalities from that. There was one guy that mostly was the dungeon master. That was what he enjoyed doing. He enjoyed doing that much more than being a player because he liked this power trip. He was kind of a geeky, nerdy kind of a guy who got a power trip out of being the dungeon master. There was another guy that was just the quintessential orc. He loved playing evil characters. He was actually a pretty evil character in his real life, and I think it gave him validation. These character traits are character traits that all souls have. And the first creator, all creators, are souls at different stages of the game, different levels of experience. This is the only sensible way you can understand the human condition. From a bigger standpoint, you can narrow it down and take any one religion and say, okay, I'm going to accept this mapping of this bigger picture as the one that fits my perspective. And that's essentially why we still have so many different religions, because there are different perspectives that work better or worse for different kinds of cultures, different kinds of societies, different countries, different languages, different backgrounds. And that's fine, as long as they stay relatively healthy and functional, as they have for, in some cases, thousands of years, up until this postmodernist revolution, where the intellectuals decided they needed to kill God. They needed to kill religion. And this is a dark thing. This is the worst religion. The worst faith is the lack of faith. Because when you have no faith, what do you replace it with? What do you replace it with? And this is the darkness that is spread throughout our entire civilization. Thinking that we don't need some spiritual basis, some moral basis for our existence, or it can be replaced by some namby-pamby philosophical basis that has no real faith behind it. Okay? I have absolutely no faith in a philosopher in a foxhole. Sophists will change their faith on a dime, argue themselves into doing whatever they want to do. This is why in the Greek times, where sophistry began, the art of being a philosopher was looked down on, because it was realized that these jerks were corrupting youth, filling them full of nonsense ideas that didn't work, that were not helpful to their society. And yes, one of those nonsense ideas was democracy. It was tried in Athens, and it failed miserably. Why? Because you can't just say, well, you can vote for whatever you want to do, and the majority rules. You know what they're going to vote for? The majority is going to vote to take all the money away from the minority. Take their property, take their lives. Every instance of pure democracy has had that happen. It was very bloody. The French Revolution was basically a perfect illustration of why democracy does not work. It very quickly devolved into an oligarchy, a very bloody oligarchy that had a security bureau that on a day-to-day basis made a list of who was going to get guillotined that day because they offended the sensibilities of the small group of people who declared that they were the representatives of the French people. And the nonsense didn't end until one guy, Napoleon, grabbed enough military power to get all the remaining wealthy people behind him and establish a dictatorship that was even worse than the monarchy that they'd had before. And the exact same thing happened in Russia 100 years later. The Communist Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, was a horrible thing. What it ended up with was far worse than the rule of the czars and the nobles, which wasn't great, but at least they had a sense of religious responsibility to their people. And they had the Russian Orthodox Church as a basis, as a cognate to their secular power, as a balance to it, to basically have the bully pulpit saying, hey, Tsar, this is not a religious thing you're doing. Your policies are starving too many peasants, are causing too many wars. And that was an effective deterrent to a lot of bad shit that we don't have anymore since this postmodernist God is dead nonsense. Atheism is a bad religion. It is a dangerous religion. And every cult of ideology that is atheistic in nature is evil. Even humanism. Because as we know, we have to share this planet with nature, with animals. we have only a finite amount of resources to go around. We have to make them work for the people that are here. And that doesn't get better by giving some bunch of self-proclaimed super intellectual meritocrats, which is basically what the World Economic Forum is, the ability to dictate to everybody else what is good for everyone. And it's really getting bad because you've got major religious leaders now joining this bunch of self-proclaimed Numpty Dumpties that think they have the right to dictate to everybody else. The Pope is in bed with them. The Dalai Lama's in bed with them. Pretty much anybody that wants to have free voice has to kowtow to these assholes. This is very dark and dangerous. We've got to stop this, and the only way it's going to be stopped is by people of all faiths joining together and saying, no mas, no more of this nonsense. If you aren't humble enough to admit of agnosticism, you're too dangerous to hold a public office. I feel strongly about this. I think that an atheist should not be able to hold a public office. They are danger to other people. They are narcissistic. They are narrow-minded, unwilling to admit that they don't know something, unwilling to admit that there's a higher power than their own overinflated ego, their overinflated notion of how smart they are. These are not the smartest people in the world. You can be sure of that after seeing what they did with this pandemic. Why do you think we call it a plandemic? This was all part and parcel of folks that thought their brain was smarter than a god, that they knew better than anybody else what was good for everybody. So well that they were willing to force it down everybody's throat so that they could feel more safe. Oh, we're making the world safe for everybody by forcing you to wear fucking masks that protect you from nothing and actually keep more germs close to your face, increase the incidence of disease, cause respiratory issues, because no one should be wearing a mask for more than an hour or two at a time. That's why surgeons have, if they're going into a long surgery that might go more than a couple of hours, they have multiple surgeons and they swap out so that one of them can be getting some good air in while the other is continuing the surgery. That's how important it is not to be wearing a mask. This is fucked up, people, and we gotta say no. We gotta tell these atheistic morons no more. You're not the smartest tools in the shed. In fact, you are the dumbest tools in the shed. If you're not humble enough to admit that other people who have had paranormal experiences, who have some spiritual exposure, some understanding that there is a greater power, that has some concern for morality and ethics, you have no business being in any kind of an office. Any kind of an office. At least be humble enough to be willing to admit to being agnostic, or you're not getting my vote. You're not going to be a company I would work for, or I would recommend anybody else work for. I don't care how much you virtue signal, how great your benefits are. I wouldn't trust you further than I could spit, and no one else should either. Now, I don't hate these people, but I have to talk strongly against them because they are destroying our civilization. And they are blaming it on the religious. That is so sick and warped. These people who have come to define freedom of religion as freedom from religion, and yes, you know who you are, and I've caught many of you out saying that is what your actual belief is. You are anti-Americans. You are against everything the Constitution stands for, and I will fight you tooth and nail. And your party, tooth and nail. Parties, maybe, because I think both parties are succumbing to this nonsense, this woke, cult, atheist nonsense. You are my enemies. And I'm not going to play Mr. Nice Guy, and I don't recommend anybody else does either. Because the moment you're nice to one of these people, the moment you tolerate them calling you stupid because you have a religion, because you believe that there's something bigger than yourself, that there's a responsibility to a higher power, the moment you put somebody down for that, you become my enemy. And I will attack you online. I will belittle you. I will demean you. And you deserve it. If all religious people banded together against these Numpty Dumpties who have no faith in anything but their own overinflated egos, we could get this world cleaned up pretty quickly. Yes, it wouldn't be perfect, but we would be more tolerant of each other than we are under the rule of these a-religious assholes that we've let take over our society. At any rate, that's what I wanted to talk about today. You may not agree. You may think I'm a horrible person for saying these things. I don't give a shit. I'm telling you what I believe, what I think is true, and what I think is good for us at this stage of the game. At any rate, till next time, that's the Omnist Hour with Rob Trump. Like, share, subscribe, and happy karma.